if you have like you're running a shower, you have your water tanks. Your performance marketing is your cold water, and your brand equity is your hot water. It depletes a lot faster, and it's a lot harder to build up. And I think there always has to be a balance of, if you do turn on, like right now, if you guys turned on heavy performance, it would crush because the brand equity you have is really strong, and it's really well admired. But if you just pivoted to only whitelisting ads and every third story is a levels tracker, eventually people are going to be like, well, this sucks. Uh, I'm over this company. And there's a few companies in the space that they're doing this now, where every third ad is this one product that they're promoting.
I thought it'd be good to chat through. Just did a think week this week where we take time off and we just go deep on writing memos, and ended up writing one on growth levers and thinking about them for scale. And we've got all these like interesting things because of inbound wait lists and how that's continued to grow. And so there are a lot of challenges that were identified, like things that are in the back of my mind that we have to solve for. And I wanted to pick your brain on was this idea of growth levers. Talk a little bit more about the wait list, talk about performance marketing. And like one of the challenges we face, just being very honest about it, is like we don't know our true growth rate. Like we really don't know our true growth rate, right? Is somebody who signs up for the wait list, is that like a conversion? Not like not an actual. It's like, because we're still getting percentage of for bottom of funnel. And so it's like it's really hard to forecast moving forward, like what is our true growth rate going to be, and then how can we impact it with certain growth levers. So that's setting up the conversation for just thinking through like what are growth levers, how should we think about them moving forward.
Yeah. Um, that's definitely a good conversation. Um, have we already started the recording of this podcast?
We started ages ago.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of growth levers do you guys look at now? Because, like, for example, you just mentioned like people signing up to the wait list. There's always a drop off from wait list to then, getting on the phone with Mike or somebody for onboarding. And then from there, I'm sure there's probably, like, I would imagine, like anywhere from a 35 to 50% conversion rate of people who end up, paying the bill and getting the sensor and then getting onboarded in the app and whatnot. Do you back out, like when we were talking about increasing email signups? I think like someone who just walks in the room might say, oh, well, let's just optimize for the cheapest email sign up, versus I think the way you probably think about it is, you know we're capturing this email today, but we don't really know the CPA of this email capture for the next 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
At least, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of different intent, and this is something we've started thinking about. Is maybe if we rewind, so January of 21, we we were working with an agency and we did some performance marketing, and it was to drive traffic, drive email signups like that. We were going conversion on it. We wanted basically to capture that email, and like the intent is cool. If we can capture this, like there's going to be some conversion rate down the road. Well, that's gone on in
Hmm.
perpetuity, because like the waitlist launch could have been March of last year. It could have been September of last year. It could be like January of 24. It's not actually going to be it. But the idea is like we stopped it pretty quickly, because there wasn't a ton of value in just capturing an email, like especially when you're running performance against it, when it's like, well, what's the true value of that? Like it's pretty easy for somebody to put in their to pay, to bet, or I should say show intent with their email, as opposed to like actually showing intent with hard dollars, right? Very
Yeah.
different behavior and very different bottom of the funnel approach. So we stopped doing that and started thinking about, back to your question of like what are the growth levers that we think about right now. Well, there are so many things that can impact waitlist growth. there's so many things that can impact email signups. And there's actually value for us to achieve our mission in getting people to sign up, like to give us their email so that we can just send them the newsletter alone and say, hey, we're educating, like, here's some material that you can educate yourself on metabolic health. And like, feel free to open it as much or as little as you want. And what we find is that there's a ton of people who get value from that. And so they might only ever be this, like, we'll call it a free tier, where you go, yeah, maybe in perpetuity, we want to continue collecting emails because we don't use product marketing. Like there isn't this typical, and here's where you can get your CGM at the bottom of an editorial article. It's straight up like, hey, what are omega-3s and like, why should you care about them? And like, how does that impact your metabolic health? Cool. You got value out of that? That's all we're asking, is like, we hope that you like found something valuable. So there's this thought of like, thinking through the different growth levers to even drive that as one of our goals, right? Like collecting more emails. But then there are also levers that we can't ignore, which is like, we're a venture back company. We have to generate meaningful growth numbers month over month once we're in launch mode. And so like, what is going to impact that, right? And how do we fuel the fire with that? That's what is one of the challenges to think through. And then like the last part of it is like, what's our true growth rate based on the things we do today? Like paid placements on David Sinclair's podcast, which is generating a ton of great traction, but like that's still probably not indicative of a true conversion rate right now, because we're still getting a ton of top of funnel traffic where people sign up with their email, and the actual conversions based on using his link are a percentage of, right? So it's like, okay, cool. What's a true growth rate? And you're like, it's really hard to say, which is not a good answer.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, it reminds me of that scene in Silicon Valley where he's like, no revenue is the goal. Then you can you can do whatever you want as a venture backed company. But yeah, I mean, I think like with I personally love the way that Levels has built its list, because it's all about quality over quantity, and I think quantity comes as a byproduct of really high quality. Even with like the newsletter that I send every Sunday, I've never spent $1 like pushing somebody to sign up for the newsletter list, nor have I like spammed groups or anything. And it just grows by forwards, and because there's a commitment to opening it, and people tend to find it valuable, which is I think why people love Levels. It's like the brand, like Levels could actually come out with almost any product, and I think people would buy it because there's so much trust built into the brand, from the way that you guys have done uh, marketing, which is more education driven and story driven. And it's not like you're like two dudes in Silicon Valley, you found an arbitrage space, and now you just found another product to be the tech, and you're just pushing it on online. But you've got real doctors on board, you've got real science. I mean, just from sitting in the the all hands, you can tell that the culture is very much aligned with it too. But there's also something too to like hitting the gas on that growth, and getting these people through the door and signed up. I think what you guys are doing, which what you guys are doing that most companies don't think about, is you're taking this LTV approach, LTV first approach, thinking about okay, this newsletter subscriber, like uh, you know, I mean, you could probably go into your newsletter platform right now and pretty much predict who is going to be your highest LTV customers based on data of open rates and click through rates, and how many emails they open in a row and how many that don't. And I'm sure you could pattern match that to the beta customers that you have on board. How many times are they clicking the link to go to a website? How much time do they then spend on the site reading something? Um, Things like that. And I think that's a really interesting world of growth to me. To me, that's actually growth marketing. I think a lot of what other people consider growth marketing is really just good media buying. But to me, that's growth marketing, where you're using you're basically using signals to understand how consumers fit into different cohorts that you're hypothesizing, and then treating them differently based on the actions that they take, whether that's going to your site, the time spent, all those things. Um, and honestly, that's what makes me really bullish on levels is the fact that everything is very considered across every step. Um, and nothing is rushed, which, investors might not be the happiest about, but I think when you look at the finish line in 15 years and you put levels at the starting line with two or three other companies that are trying to do something similar, I think levels is at the finish line first and the fastest. It's just it just that launch period or that time getting to launch might just take longer, whereas other people see that as an arbitrage opportunity, which always just ends up as short term success.
Hmm. That's one thing that I've been thinking about a lot too, which is this idea of companies that go down the path of performance too quickly and they rely on it as like their channel for acquisition. And then there's like, I think you and I have talked about this before, where it's like, then there's some algo change, there's some consumer behavior
Hmm.
change. Like a platform is the du jour platform, and people go all in on that. Facebook goes down. Like remember when we'll call it Meta. Remember when Meta went down, whenever that was, and everyone was like, "Oh my goodness, my DTC sales are like just plummeting. I lost so much revenue." And you're like, that was your only acquisition channel. Like you relied so heavily on that being your channel for driving growth or revenue that it hurts when there's platform risk associated with it. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about too, which is like, how do
Well,
we create a sustainable growth engine?
I think the other thing though is, like, to me, levels doesn't even sit in the world of that type of marketing, um, and neither does a brand like House. And it's because it's the intent from day one is not, let's just build this machine, this acquisition machine online. The intent from the very beginning, like with House, the intent is we want to educate Americans on. There's like three main intents. One is we want to educate Americans on this aperitif culture. The second is we want to push the large alcohol incumbents to be more conscious of lower ABV drinking, because not everybody needs a hangover and not everybody needs to drink such high proof alcohol on weeknights or just to celebrate. And the third one is they want to rally, they want to be there when people are getting together. And so the intent of the company is different from the beginning. I think Levels is the same, like, the intent of Levels is we want to build, we want to be the go-to destination when somebody has any question about CGM or glucose or things of that nature, regardless of whether they ever become a customer or not. I think like you and Sam and the rest of the team could care less if somebody came to your site and converted to a customer. You just want to be that one person or that one brand that they remember when they did get their education or when they did learn something new. um, and so I think, like, when you compare that to a D2C brand, which their intention is, okay, we're going to go we're going to go quadruple our sales next year, and the year after that we're going to double it again. There's the actions that are taken are significantly different in that 0 to 1 stage. House is another company that didn't spend any acquisition dollars their first maybe 2 years of business. Everything was driven by the education, by the content created from consumers, from the word of mouth, from the gathering, and that's because it maps to the intent that they had. Similar to Levels, the a lot of the, at least from what I see externally, a lot of the people who want to try Levels, it comes from word of mouth. It comes from people seeing it on social media. It comes from uh, FOMO, basically, versus, oh, I saw an ad and I can't wait to go get 20% off. Um, I'm losing my train of thought here in this rant, but I think the thing is basically the intent of Levels is so pure that I don't think that, like, even when you do hit launch and you might see this opportunity on paid media for arbitraging CPMs and lifetime value. I genuinely don't think like you guys would exploit that in a way that is not valuable to the end consumer, where 10 years later they're still thanking Levels for being a part of their life,
Hmm.
if that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, it's something we've been thinking about a lot with this idea of like value through membership and just value as a company. So it seems so ridiculous to spend time other than like yes, a company should spend time building culture internally and making sure that um, as an async and as a remote company that you've got relatively strong infrastructure and strong foundational values in place. The idea of like, hey, we're going to just record ourselves like using reminders in Superhuman and we put it out to the world, not because it's like, hey, look how good we're like, we use these things. It's like, hey, here's how we use them. If it's helpful to you, like, awesome. There's like no ask. We're not asking you to do. Now go to our blog. Like now buy a CGM. It's like, literally, like if that inspires you to build a company one day or to feel like you can do it or just be better at your work, we're like, awesome. We like, hopefully that helped you out. I mean, it's like happy to help. It's like the the cliche, happy to help, right? But it's like that is truly the intent from the editorial standpoint. All the educational material we're putting out pertaining to metabolic health, from the business standpoint, like all of these silly videos that we do and all these like silly, hey, here's a blog post about, again, like the way we use this platform, it's back to the intent. So do you think if we went down the path of performance marketing, that it dilutes the brand? Now there's like two parts to the question. One is like the acquisition channel and the other is strictly the awareness play of we're paying to provide lift to like the ultimate guide to metabolic health just because we like no ask in it. It's like, hey, hopefully you read this and change your outlook on why you should care about your metabolic health. Like how do you look at those two things? Is there any dilution in our brand value if we were to do either?
The way I think about performance marketing is compared to brand marketing is like um, performance. You know, if you have like you're running a shower, you have your water tanks. Your performance marketing is your cold water, and your brand equity is your hot water. It depletes a lot faster, and it's a lot harder to build up. And I think there always has to be a balance of, if you do turn on, like right now, if you guys turned on heavy performance, it would crush because the brand equity you have is really strong and it's really well admired. But if you just pivoted to only whitelisting ads and every third story is a levels tracker, eventually people are going to be like, well, this sucks. Uh, I'm over this company. And there's a few companies in the space that they're doing this now, where every third ad is this one product that they're promoting. But then you have to figure out, you have to balance that with, okay, now how do we stay relevant? How do we create moments around what we're doing? How do we keep people excited? Even if we've hit them 8 or 9 times in the last 3 months, how do we still stay exciting? Which is, I think, what Levels does really, really well. I think there's also a way of acquiring customers in a performance manner that is still building brand equity. I mean, that was something that I did at Hint really well, which I called it performance branding, which is you efficiently spend performance dollars, but at the same time, any of the messaging, the creative, the pages you drive people to, it's entirely focused on education versus me pushing on you to buy. It's like, I'm going to give you all the information, and eventually the information is so compelling and actually valuable that it's going to become your decision to make the purchase with us versus, here, scroll down, click this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, when you look at like post iOS 14 and 15 with the tracking issues, that used to work really well, where you could just have very performance driven marketing because Facebook immediately could take 75 touch points that you have on the internet, between publishers and apps and what you're doing on your home Wi-Fi network and whatnot, and basically put you on a scale of 1 to 10 and say, okay, Nik, because he went to the level site and he spent, 7.8 seconds on this page, and then he navigated towards the waitlist page and entered his email, but then he went back to a different page and maybe he chose a different color of something. We're going to put him at a 7.9 out of 10 in terms of interest. And we know that historically, if we show him this specific messaging with this creative at this time in this placement, we have, a very high probability of converting him. Now Facebook has really none of that info. Most cookies get deleted within a day. And so a lot of the ads that actually do well today are ones that are education first. They do tell a story and they basically do give all that information, and it has to be valuable. I mean, I don't think you can sell a terrible product nowadays. You definitely shouldn't, because that's not a good thing to do. But nowadays, nowadays you have to have something that is genuinely valuable to the person at the other end of the screen, and you have to frame it in a way where it becomes their idea to participate and their idea to want to buy. And I was talking to another founder this morning, and I think it just comes down to asking the simple question of, how do you get somebody so excited that they have FOMO for not being a participant in what this brand is doing? Whether that means something as high upper funnel as signing up for the newsletter and just being a part of this ecosystem in general, or they're, a consistent daily user of the CGM tracker and they're opening the Levels app, 7 to 10 times a day, and they're logging everything from exhaustive walks to blueberries to their large meals. But it all goes back to, especially today, I think it all goes back to how do you get somebody excited, and how do you frame it in a way where, or not even frame it in a way, because that sounds sketchy, but how do you make sure that what you're delivering is genuinely valuable to that person versus there's an arbitrage opportunity and we can sell into it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a couple of things that are interesting with the space we're in too, that I've thought about from a performance standpoint. So let's use cars. If you start, and not like Tesla, assume it's just like naturally aspirated gas powered car. People already know what it does. They know the job to be done. They get it. Like you're not selling them on a value prop. You're just selling them on brand at that point. Assume it's like an SUV or something that people like visually look at it. They can identify what the like job to be done is. And they're like, yeah, I'm in or I'm out. We've got a different job to do, which is like educating people about this thing. Like, what is the benefit to using this thing? How can it change your behavior, your life, all of these things, the way that you make decisions? So there's an element of the awareness play, the education and awareness play, that's top of funnel, not even from a brand standpoint, just from a like, here's what this thing does. It's a little bit different play than like the car company that you can skip. Like you're basically just like skipping the education phase because like everyone knows what the car does. How do you think about? There's a couple questions on this. So one is like, do you think that companies, maybe it's like a little bit John Nash, like game theory, like, do you think companies think that they should undertake performance because it's like, well, man, everyone does it, so like we should do it too, and then they just get into this weird game theory of like, where are they going to get to Nash equilibrium on it? Like, do you think that happens?
Yeah, I think it happens a lot. I think when anybody starts running ads and they've got something good, it converts well for, one, because it's like you're introducing something which is actually valuable, and two, generally the platforms love to give you good returns the first, few hundred or few $1,000s of spend. But when that turns into, the problem comes when the focus shifts from we need to focus on education and building brand to we need to acquire X number of users in a short period of time. and the problem is that there's less focus put on sustaining or increasing that brand equity, and there's more focus on, okay, how do we get more content out that fits that performance channel, or how do we start adding upsells in cart, and how do we, it just becomes a game of like, how well can we trick this person into becoming a customer versus, you know, how much can we push education so that it's still their decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the
And
things.
when that shift happens, that's when I think that, like, that to me is always a big red flag, or, oh, this company is going to be in trouble soon. Um, when it's all about, okay, how do we drive sell through, or when it's all about how do we drive top line versus, um, like, we were talking to a company today, and their entire goal is sell through at a retailer and online direct to consumer sales, but there was nothing around, okay, how are we educating the consumer, how are we going to make sure that when they search for the product there's relevant content there. There's nothing around, then I said, okay, we really need to think about, like, what is the journey leading up to this. When somebody comes to this ad, let's assume they just even click the ad. Um, when they get there, we can't just assume that this one product page is going to do everything. There needs to be a component of, why does somebody trust us as a brand? What does our brand stand for? Is that communicated? Like, there's this whole ecosystem around it that a lot of times gets forgotten. And I think it's because, some of the early successes in, D2C and performance marketing were actually companies that had built really strong, incredible brands that then turned on this funnel of, heavy performance customer acquisition. Um, but they had that whole piece of it prior to turning that on. Whereas when you start with that and then try to build back into, oh, how do we build brand, or, what is community and all these things, it just turns into this, like, well, what's an app we can use to build community, or who's a consultant we can hire to go build our community, and, what is the coupon, redemption app we can use to drive sell through at Walmart and Target. And it just never works like that. It just it I mean, maybe a 1% chance that that'll work, but it's so rare that that works. And that, I think, is honestly the biggest flaw with companies that launch nowadays, is they focus so much on, okay, how do we build a site that has all the cross sells and the upsells and optimized product pages, which is great. But then they forget this piece of actually education and awareness, and they go straight to, okay, now we got to turn on Facebook ads, and wait, why aren't the sales coming through? Why is our CPA high? Why do people not click our ads? And there's this whole forgotten land of, like, well, you sell a product, you're not a brand at all, right? You sell a product, and maybe it solves a good problem, but no one cares because you haven't put that out there. And they shouldn't care because they don't owe you any of your time, or they don't owe you their time, and they don't owe you their attention. You have to, it's your job to put things out which then earn their attention on their own time. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah, it absolutely does. It
it's like
absolutely.
people, a lot of the brands today, now I'm just complaining about some of our clients, but a lot of the brands today, they like expect that consumers will see an ad and they better click, and then they better come and they better buy our trial. And once they buy our trial, they better come back and they better subscribe. And they better subscribe to a bundle, which makes sense for us from an AOV standpoint or a margin standpoint. And if they don't, then, you know, then something's wrong with Facebook, right? Everything goes to blame on these platforms, and that wouldn't happen if there was proper education and just everything before it that should have happened in that 0 to 1 versus, I guess a lot of brands play this game of 1 to 10 or
Hmm.
10 to 50 without playing the proper 0 to 1 and building that foundation. And I think that to me is uh, one of my favorite things in whenever I invest early in a lot of these companies, is distinguishing, okay, does this founder have the know-how of how to build that 0 to 1 properly. And if they don't, then it's very hard for them to um, get to that 1 to 50 or 10 to 50, and that part actually is efficient versus um, they just go out and end up raising tons of money, and by the time it gets to that 50, it's not where it should be.
Yeah, you miss the sustainability standpoint. It's something that
Yeah.
it's part of our growth strategy doc that, and it gets linked in a bunch of places where, because we've got a pull product as opposed to a push product, we're lucky that we get a ton of earn media through all the UGC. And sometimes it's sharing like the superhuman snippets video, and other times it's like, check out my data, right? So it's like this wide gamut of things that feel very genuine. But that allows us to not have to pay for top of funnel awareness, because it's like the community is doing the job for us, which is great. But in doing so, one of our lines that we use is like, we won't compete for 3 seconds of attention. We're not going to try
Hmm.
to trick people into um, like hack their attention and trick them into buying something. Like, gotcha. That's just like doesn't fall within our values. And we always say, like, we'd rather dump a bag, like just a pile of money, into improving the product or community or experience, and like $0 into like marketing, traditional marketing, because it's the right thing to do. And it's back to like the intent of trying to educate people about metabolic health. One of the questions, or actually a couple different questions. One is this idea of companies that don't do any performance or any like paid marketing at all. So like the notorious ones, Tesla. I think Tupperware is like another one. There's all these like case studies of companies that have done it. But there's also the examples of um, like the Times article that came out, or the Freakonomics podcast, where they analyzed spend. And these are companies that aren't just saying like, oh, well, we stopped spending $100,000 a month, a year. It doesn't matter. It was like, we didn't spend $100 million last year, like significant amounts of capital on marketing. We removed that from the budget, and like we saw no changes. We actually saw things go up to the right. How do you think about that? Like this whole idea of not doing paid marketing at all, and just focusing on building a great company.
um, I think there's definitely a certain set of companies where this works. It requires, I think, one of the biggest thing I think it requires is it has to fit into a routine that people are comfortable talking about. I think Levels fits in there. I think like Eight Sleep fits in there as well. Tesla, obviously, Tupperware, like things that that fit into, you do them daily or high, at a high frequency, that other people can relate to. But I mean, I personally am a big fan of kind of what you said, like product led growth. Um, if it's possible, I think it's something that a lot of people should be focusing on. Like even a company like Mad Happy does a great job of that too. Their products and the collections that they drop are just consistently 12 out of 10, and that's what keeps expanding the brand. And what's cool about product led growth versus advertising led growth is, ad led growth is, you're kind of growing. You have this one like central point, and it's just slowly the ripple gets bigger. But with product led growth, that happens with each consumer. And so it's like advertising led growth times your number of consumers that turn into evangelists. So I'm definitely a big fan of it. I think there's also different ways that companies do that, right? Like the Tupperware stuff is known for those Tupperware parties. Tesla does. Tesla is just the best of its category, and so they get tons of earned media out of it. They have a very charismatic CEO who's constantly kind of shaking up different things, um, which gets people really excited. Um, so I think it's maybe less marketing in one spot, but they compensate for it in a different way. Um, But that said, I think every company should try to figure out what is that, you know, essentially what is that engine that is not powered by a rented platform that you can count on to drive awareness and excitement around your product.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. It's like you can't pay for the head nod. Like
You can't.
the head nod is something that like you're part of the tribe. And the nod
100%.
exists across so many. There was a memo that we had circulated internally probably a month or two ago, and it was talked about the head nod, and like the head nod actually spans so many consumer groups that you don't think about, right? So when looking into it, it's like, oh, the head nod, the Jeep head nod. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't know the Jeep head. It makes sense. Like I get the Jeep head nod, but where it started is like, I'm a huge car fan, love old muscle cars, love Corvettes, love all these things. But it's like, so understood like the head nod from there, the like boat wave, the like Harley nod. There's like certain signals that mean like you're part of this community or this tribe. And it got me thinking, I'm like, man, you can't like pay for the head nod. You can't like manufacture the head nod. It either is there or it's not. And it's probably one of the hardest things to do is to like build a meaningful head nod.
Totally. And yeah, I mean that also drives people to want to be a part of that community too, and feel that sense of belonging. I think people the head nod comes actually from when people feel in a very secure part, or they feel very secure themselves being a part of that brand or that experience or that even that community. But like if you're a boat owner or you drive a Jeep, and that's what makes you feel happiest, you're more than happy to give that nod or be a part of that. Um, when I see somebody on my Twitter timeline debating Eight Sleep, I'm always the first to jump in and just rave about how amazing the product is, because uh, not I don't I'm not an investor in Eight Sleep. I'm not affiliated with them, but I genuinely love the product and it makes me feel amazing as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's actually another interesting thing. A lot of these companies that try to build community from a boardroom meeting of we need to build community, they try to manufacture it versus it has to kind of be built again into the foundation and the intent of the business from day one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the head nod is the LTV. It's like there's no CAC for head
Exactly.
nod. Like you
Yeah.
convert to be a head nod. It's just like it doesn't exist. But
Yeah.
it's funny because if the head nod is something that can't be manufactured, it's genuinely there. The only way to do it is to build it over time. Like you build it over
hmm
time through intent by building a great product, by building something that people feel a part of. It's one of those.
I think it's three things. It's time, it's quality, and it's consistency. All three of them are, it requires a lot of time. It has to be the best possible quality, because if you're an enthusiast about a Jeep, an off-road vehicle, if Jeep is not the best quality product, you'll find the other one, and then you'll
Mm,
become a fan of that and the evangelist for that. And the other one is consistency, right? If you're a part of even like the Levels newsletter, and your first two emails are great, but then it looks like an intern wrote the rest of those because they had to fill out the welcome flow or whatever it is, um, you won't be a fan of that. You're not going to be excited to open that. And so those three things I think are what it really requires. But the problem, and this goes back to why a lot of these D2C brands find that, they look for the arbitrage, is it's the time that you can't accelerate. You can't accelerate the 0 to 1, whether it's launching a company or whether it's, looking to build that head nod.
mhm. Yeah, it's something that we are working towards is building community on a deeper level. Right now, we're lucky that community has organically formed itself, and it's actually been beneficial. We've got a private Facebook group. It's only it's just under 2,000 people. So say it's roughly 10% of all people who've been through the beta so far. Um, and we haven't had a ton of bandwidth to focus on it. But what's happened over the past year is that as we've gotten less active, there was appetite, if you want to call it that, for us to be more involved. Like, hey, we'd love if the team was more involved here. And sometimes we'll pop in and ask a question. But in general, what's happened is by us being less involved, it's organically built itself. So it's not a support channel. It's not a Levels is going to answer my questions. It's a like Billy's going to answer Jane's question because Billy just wants to answer it. And that is like right there. It's like you can feel the meaningful community connections coming from this group and these people who are doing it out of intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, I think another thing that is undervalued is um, like, I think actually the best way for anybody who enters a new industry to um, to get their name out in an industry is like, cold email a shitload of people and meet a bunch of awesome people and build these relationships and then just start connecting people. When you find two people could be synergistic, you connect them. And when you connect somebody, it's there's really no lift to you, right? Other than maybe sending an email or a text. But to those two people, uh, you are now the person who connected them to somebody, and they might end up doing something magical down the road, but you'll always be that person that gets the credit. And similarly, I think that one thing brands don't think about is when they have this group of consumers and customers and evangelists and subscribers, even a lot of times they do share like relatively a lot of the same interests or um, interests, behaviors, things like that. And there's a lot of value, I think, in even just figuring out how to connect consumers with one another. It doesn't have to be that Levels needs a community manager who's talking in the Facebook group and posting a poll every day and doing something like that. There's a lot of value in just knowing, oh yeah, I found this person through the Levels community, and Levels wasn't necessarily involved other than they orchestrated this space for me to find somebody really dope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's back to this idea of the head nod, the community, and growth levers. So a growth lever, I think Peloton had listed in their S1, and I don't think they listed exactly what it was, but they said, hey, one of the strongest growth levers or growth engines for us is referrals. Like we crush with referrals. And referrals come very naturally if you do the head nod. Like you are doing the head nod with 8 Sleep. So in a sense, you're very willing to you're almost like acting as a referral by getting in the middle of the conversation and saying like, "Hey, I'm here to tell you how great my experience is." But the alternative is people that you're very close with, you're going to be like, hey, listen, like, I'm not selling you anything. I'm just telling you my sleep is significantly better. My sleep hygiene, sleep quality is better because of this thing. That is an informal referral. As soon as you start to think about the game mechanics behind that and incentivizing people in the right way, it's like the head nod is a very strong growth lever. And it's something that we've started thinking about too, is like user referrals are something that we have to understand how to push on them without like pushing on them, if that makes sense. So like
Yeah.
what are your thoughts around user referrals and how we can lean into those in a way that feels Levels, if you want to frame it that way?
Um, I think a lot of the referrals that I've brought into Levels either stem from, actually, this is interesting. There's been a few people that I've referred into Levels, and you know, either I saw them have a conversation somewhere, and they were interested in Levels, and then I said, hey, let me be the one to put you on a red carpet with Mike, right? So don't sign up for the wait list. I'm going to intro you directly to Mike, and instead of being on this 120,000 person wait list, like he'll onboard you tomorrow. There's vanity that comes in there, and I think that was something that Clubhouse actually did really well. was
Mm-hmm.
picking up on how to really nail that. But I do that all the time. If there's somebody who wants to get on, and I know that I'm going to get the social capital out of it from making that
Mm-hmm.
referral, and then they get started and whatnot. Like I'm always the first person to do that. Um, both because the social capital and this person's going to hopefully find value in the product and the experience. But the other one around how do you there's like tactically there's ways to do it, right? Referral links or codes with Sharma as the code, and that gets you ahead of it. Um but pushing on customer referrals in a levels manner is, it's funny. I don't know that there is a specific message that would go from levels that says something really other than you get every person who's gone through the beta gets 2 invites to bring somebody they really value into the levels community. And I genuinely don't think you would need to say anything else to turn that on. I think I wrote a newsletter about referrals and loyalty a few weeks ago, and I just hate the way that most referral programs are built. They're incentivized to give you $5 and give $5 to somebody else, and they just come off very fake. They're just like they're there because they have to be. It's a part of that playbook. But I think the way that like levels is a very premium experience. It's not a product. It's a premium experience, and because of that, and because of the brand and the educate, I think a lot of it is the education and the quality of that experience. People become evangelists and really excited about their own experience with levels, and then they end up talking about it. And if they were to know that they could bring somebody else in, um, to also share that experience with them, like they would totally do it. I think Whoop did a great job with their referral system, just like that. They offer an incentive of a free month, but Whoop is kind of in the same category of, you can actually see the change in your life, not like, oh, I wake up and I feel better, but you can actually numerically see the values. You can see what your sleep was when you put your Whoop on for the first week ever, to being 4 6 months in, and maybe you haven't drank now for 3 months, and your quality of life has just improved a lot. So I think you actually have that to your advantage. But I guess the punchline is, the levels way to do it, in my opinion, would be that you tell somebody they have X amount of invites, or they can skip the line with 4 people, and maybe they get an accelerated fast pass line with 10 other people. Um, but I also think what that does is it keeps that cohort very high quality. If I know that I only have 2 invites or 3 invites to levels, maybe even 10 versus unlimited, I'm going to make sure that those 3 or 10 people are some of the best people that I bring into the program. And I'm also, just as a psychological byproduct, I'm going to make sure that there are 10 people that are also going to be excited about this, because then when they enjoy that experience, I get the credit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a social graph. I mean, that's one of the things that was really interesting about Twitter. Has somewhat of a social graph, not from a person to person standpoint, but definitely from I joined in. Like, that's not
Mm-hmm.
on other platforms. Like, it means something to say that you were on Twitter, like on in 2007, right? Like, that means something. Um, Clubhouse did it from the social graph standpoint of, like, Nik referred me in. That meant something. I don't know how strong that social graph is now, but it meant something at the time. I wonder if the social graph it's something I was thinking about with, like, members onboarding other members. Imagine if there was like a social graph where you could see like how many members you've onboarded, or like how many connections you have in that standpoint. Like, you never want it to feel like it is this multi-level marketing, right? And incentivize it in the wrong
Yeah,
way. That is like so far outside our values. But like the idea of seeing somebody who is a strong node in the network is a very interesting thing. And knowing who that pillar of the community is, like that means something. Lululemon does an amazing job with their community by distributing it geographically. So it's like you and I might not know the person in Regina, Saskatchewan, who's like the levels ambassador, Lululemon ambassador there, but like Billy means something in that community and to the like 80 other people. And that's a very interesting approach to building community and building this like referral program, because you're essentially like referring people to become part of the head nod crew. Like you are now
totally.
practicing yoga with this group of people. And that's what matters, is this micro community that doesn't feel manufactured from a digital standpoint or an IRL standpoint. It's like it's all amalgamated and there's a lot of crossover in it. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
Lots of places to go. One last question here for you is this idea of the wait list. So I'm going to get it wrong. I think as of yesterday, it was 191. It's growing. It's growing a lot. And we're getting closer to opening it up. We don't have a set date in mind where it's like, here's the target date, but it's inevitable that it's going to continue to grow. It's natural to see that people who signed up recently have a higher propensity to convert. Like there is more intent there than somebody who signed up in May of 2020. But like a 2-year-old lead is going to act like a 2-year-old lead.
Sure.
How do you think that we should launch, like open up the wait list and do it in a diligent way? Because one way is we can't be naive and assume that there's a certain conversion rate based on sheer size of the wait list. Like extract out all the international leads and just say, I don't know the exact number right now, but assume it's like 150,000 that are domestic leads. Not all of those are going to convert at the same rate based on cohort, based on sign up date, based on all these things. But how do you think we should be thoughtful about opening it up? Knowing that there will be a probability of conversion for a certain number of people and not others, and never wanting it to feel like we're trying to like sell people or convert them. What's the approach that you'd take with the wait list? It's a lot of
I
people.
would probably do, yeah, I think the first thing is I would try to tag these users as best as I could. So this email address, what device did they come in on? What browser did they come in on? And what was their source? Was it a blog post? Was it they clicked a link on Twitter that brought them to the sign up page? Because I think at the end of this experiment, you're going to want to look back and you're going to see some very obvious patterns. The second thing is then I think, segmenting this list. So your list is, let's say, 200,000 people over the last 2 years. How do you create cohorts within this list of, okay, maybe this is, the this is like 20 to 24 months. We're going to create one that's like they signed up within the last 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 4 months. But basically you start creating these cohorts. And the way I would actually do it is, you know, pick a number of how many people you're going to let in, but ideally try to test multiple cohorts at once to understand what the conversion rate per length cohort is, or cohort by how long they've been staying on the wait list.
Yeah, tenure.
And yeah, and ideally you're getting maybe, I don't know, 25 to 50 per cohort, which allows you to get a decent enough sample size. And then I think you'll start to see, okay, you're right, this person that's been on for 2 years, like, they don't care anymore. Um, or or you might see this person doesn't care, but the person who's been here for 2 years and has opened over 70% of the emails we sent them, like, they're ready to get on the call the next day. But I think you'll be able to basically understand from that, okay, how many, you'll actually, what you'll really be able to do is just predict, okay, what is the likelihood of this person converting? And depending on what your goals as a business are, if it's, well, we need to, jumpstart revenue, well, then you'll be able to just filter down to exactly what based on pattern behavior is going to convert the highest and bring them on board. Versus the others, you might, I don't know, maybe you'll put that segment of if you find that long tenure, less than 70% open rate, they came in on, I love shitting on Android. So they came in on an Android and and that's that customer, then maybe you actually create a whole separate segment to try to re-nurture them or re-educate them or build excitement within that group so that they can then transfer into a cohort that is ready to be onboarded.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the way I would think about it, is tagging, testing, and then applying those learnings back to the list that exists.
Yeah, interesting. One thing we've been thinking about is we did some early Jam and I did some waitlist drip tests to see what's the probability of conversion based on tenure and based on when that cohort joined the waitlist. And some of the learnings were, I mean, it's like silly to even say it, but we're like, oh, we just have to take a full funnel approach. Like some people, if they signed up when our educational material might not have been as prevalent, and granted they can open emails and educate themselves, they might not know what they signed up for. So their CGM and all these things, it's like we have to re-educate them about what this device is and why they would use it. And it's like, oh, now they're
Right.
ready to convert. So
Right.
sweet. Well, let's leave it there, man.